So in this video I will tell you how to, where to and why to photograph northern lights. We had an amazing winter season with lots of beautiful lights, and you can see the picture here on my background. It's one of those that I was able to capture during this season. So I just want to go briefly about what you can expect in this video, and maybe it will help you in your future adventure when you go into the northern Norway or some countries like Finland, maybe Iceland, but it's generally specific for the area I'm living in and for the Lofoten Islands. So let's dive into this. And the first thing, the best weather condition for photographing the northern lights will be obviously clear skies, and I would say in some cases there should be no moon in the sky at the time when you photograph the northern lights, unless you specifically want the moon or moonlight on the subjects with northern lights. So for example, when you photograph mountains and you just want the northern lights to be as a nice touch to the photo you're making, then you probably want to photograph at the time and catch the time with clear skies, which is quite hard in Lofoten because most of the time we have rainy weather, lots of precipitations, lots of wind, which will disturb your photography adventure, but they still may open beautiful possibilities even if it's windy or rainy, I don't know, snowy. So the weather. You need clear skies, preferably no wind because you're going to set your camera on a tripod and the wind will sort of shake it, and even if you have steady tripod, the strong winds will just, I don't know, blow it away. You can use some apps to check the forecast for the Aurora Borealis, but you should not rely on them so much. There is like app I use personally, it's called Aurora Pro. It's not sponsored, but I use it and it generally gives you the information about northern lights, and I'm sure there is lots of internet pages that help you with the forecast for the, I believe there is lots of free versions for the app to check the northern lights forecast. For example, one of them is Norwegian general weather forecast. Is called YIR. Don't know. I don't know. I will just scratch it somewhere on the screen so you know the name of the app and the other option, which is free. So basically, what northern lights is a collision of solar particles with the Earth's atmosphere. And the more the energy, basically, as I understand it, I may be incorrect about scientific terms, but as more energy thrown into the Earth, solar particles or whatever it is, the higher chances of higher KP and higher chances that those charged particles will engage with the atmosphere, higher ups of the atmosphere. You can expect the northern lights pretty much every day in northern hemisphere. They will just have different power and different amount of actual light that you can register with your camera and capture it. So let's say you have 5 points or 3 points or 2 points. You can rely on this information, but you probably will still be able to photograph northern lights even if there is like 1 kp or 2. It doesn't really matter, it doesn't change much, but the kp only shows you how far south the lights will be. So for example, when you're in Lofoten, the higher the kp, the maybe you will be less lucky with northern lights to be over the certain mountains and locations here in Lofoten. So for example, if you want to photograph Hamnøy from this famous bridge with a view over the village and this mountain and northern lights on top of this, you probably will need lower KP, or you will need to wait much more hours across the night for the northern lights to hit above the mountain. not to hit above the mountain, but appear above the mountain for your shot, because they will be higher up in the sky, sort of like more southern, more to south from the north, so if that makes sense. And the lower the KP, they will be closer to the north, and so you will have more chances to photograph them in correct places, basically. And that's my understanding to it. Another thing is basically composition and locations. You need to, when you travel to Lofoten, you need to have at least something in mind, because if you have limited amount of time here, as most people do, you, I don't know, for 1 week here or less, let's say, maybe more, 2 weeks, you need to have it this in your head, and you need to keep it and be on the location probably most of the days when you photograph in Northern Lights, because if you just rush through, you probably will end up with just mediocre shots. Maybe if you're lucky, that's the point, if you're lucky you will end up with a good shot, but if you're not so lucky, you need to give yourself a lot of time photographing Northern Lights, because they're not just here all the time. There can be window spawn of the 30 seconds time when there is absolutely gorgeous, amazing, unstoppable light dancing that you want to capture, and then it's quiet for an hour or two, and then they come back, and it can be random. It's pretty much can be random. So in my understanding, of course, maybe a scientist will disagree, it's not random and they can calculate it, but I'm not a scientist, I'm a photographer. So from my experience, you need to spend a lot of time on the location. That just be ready, it's gonna be cold if it's winter, spring or fall. It's going to be cold, prepare yourself some tea, prepare yourself some warm, or wear some warm socks. Prepare to be cold and stay in the cold and wait for the lights to hit the sky. And be ready that it may happen there won't be any light at all. It could happen, but usually it doesn't. So just be ready for this. Be ready with your locations, be ready with what you want to photograph, and that's pretty much it from the perspective of the non-technical stuff. So let's say you already know the location and you know what you want to photograph, and you have your camera, you bought some tripod, it doesn't matter for the camera and for the tripod, actually. It's more about the lens you have. So for Lofoten Islands and for Norway in general, I would recommend using a wide angle, maybe even super wide angle lenses. Like for Northern Lights and Lofoten, I would generally recommend you to use wide angle lenses. And one example would be the lens I shoot this video on, which is 17-28 Tamron lens. f2.8, it's still fast, and sort of f2.8 is quite fast, but it's, in my opinion, not enough for Northern Lights. And other is more expensive lenses you can buy, but it doesn't matter. So the price of the lens doesn't really matter. You need to have really fast lens. So like, let's say f1.8, f1.4, f1.2, and f2.8 will work as well. If it's zoom lens, for example, you have something like 14-24 or 12-24 like Sigma and Sony has. For example, you can get yourself something like Sony 14mm G Master 1.8. It's a good lens for the Northern Lights because it's really fast and it's really sharp, and you want a fast and sharp lens for this matter. So when you have a tripod, a camera and a wide angle lens, what you need else? Pretty much that's it. You just need your camera, wide angle lens, fast wide angle lens. You can work with less faster lenses, but then you need to keep your exposure longer, but that's another point of the video, so I'll get to it later. So let's sum it up. You need the camera, doesn't matter which camera. You can shoot it on film, you can shoot it on digital cameras, old digital cameras, new digital cameras, it doesn't matter. crop sensor, full frame sensor, I don't know, medium format sensor, doesn't really matter what you shoot on. It's all about the lens. You need a steady tripod, but don't overthink it. Any tripods modern are really steady, like you can buy it, I don't know, for 100 euro, it doesn't matter. But don't cheap out on them. Don't buy something for 20 euro and expect it to work well, because it still will do the job, but it won't do the job correctly, so just be ready for this. About the techniques to photograph northern lights. So there is multiple different approaches you can take with photographing northern lights, and depending on the condition of the event itself, for example, depending on the condition of the northern lights and how bright they are, how powerful they are, and how moving they are, because they can be pretty steady like water, you know, like calm ocean, and they change their turn really, and they change their form really slowly, or they can be really distinguishedly textured with like stripy looking thing, and you need to be ready for any of those events, any of those things. You need to be ready for any of the possible northern lights outcome happening. So because they're pretty unpredictable, it doesn't, for example, for fast moving northern lights you need really fast shutter speed. That's basically like photographing sports, let's say. You don't need this kind of shutter speed, like 1/1000 shutter speed, but you need about, let's say, usually people would recommend you 4 seconds for generally they would recommend you 4 seconds exposure for photographing northern lights, but you maybe will need in some cases 1.5 seconds of exposure time, and you need to keep this in mind and be ready to adjust your settings all the time. So this is a key point. Generally I would recommend settings like this. If the northern lights are fast moving, if the northern lights are fast moving and lots of texture is in the frame, then you probably need shutter speed about 2.5-2 seconds with ISO around 2000. And if they're slowly moving, not so much happening and going on with them, you probably will need shutter speed around 5 seconds. Advice is not to rush things and don't overthink it. Just be calm and be ready to take your time with the photographing, and never ever try to change your composition while seeing the northern lights dancing around like crazy. Don't adjust your composition to the lights unless you really want to, because lights, it's sort of you are running and trying to capture two rabbits. You want end composition and the lights together. Don't rush things when you photograph northern lights. Never do it. And generally I understand that when you travel to Lofoten you may have little time and you would like to spend more time here, and you want to make as much shots, as much pictures as possible in a limited amount of time, and it's understandable. You like 24/7 outside, you rush things, you want these shots, and you want to be ready, and you want to be out all the time. But don't rush it with northern lights. They will appear, they will change their location, and they will move around the sky all the time, and they will become stronger, smaller, weaker, faster, more texture, less texture. You just need to keep those things in mind, because if you rush, what you will end up with is basically nothing. You will end up with beautiful northern lights, for example, but you won't end up with a shot you want. You will end up with a shot you want, but then there would be no northern lights in the shot, for example. So just keep this in mind, be patient and wait your time. Prepare the composition in advance and don't move. Just enjoy the show. Put your camera on time-lapse with the settings, accordingly, or you can adjust settings during the time lapse. Probably on most of the cameras, I don't know, but yeah, that's basically it for the photographing in Northern Lights. So from technical perspective, let's sum it up. You need fast lens, ISO not so high, and try to keep it as low as possible. Good tripod, but not super. It doesn't matter if it's super expensive or super cheap, as long as it's steady. It should work. And yeah, camera, they really don't matter, but of course, if you have good camera, good for you. You will make probably more quality like shots, but also it's pretty speculative thing. So yeah, so in terms of compositions and why you need also a wide angle lens, I will get to it from a different perspective. So since the place and Lofoten are quite narrow to each other, and lots of like really tall mountains, 600, 500 meters tall, since there's lots of tall mountains, you want a wide angle lens in order to compress, make the composition work. Because if you use more closer lens like 24 to 70, it will still work. Like 24mm is still pretty wide lens, but it won't be as wide as you want, believe me, because there's lots of happening in the sky and you also want to keep the composition. So you need wide angle fast lens that you get the composition correctly and you get Northern Lights. Wide angle is the way to go. It's just simple as that. About other technique that I use photographing Northern Lights is regarding focusing and how you focus. So basically when you focus, what you want to do is for Northern Lights and for skies in general, you want to make stars appear as small as possible on your viewfinder or on your screen on the camera. So try to make them as small as possible, and it will basically determine that they're as sharp as possible. Other alternative, if your camera is capable, for a good preview, then you can manually focus on the mountains basically. Other thing to keep in mind when you come in exactly to Lofoten is there's lots of small villages around and they all have street lamps. They all have street light. There's lots of street light when you photograph roads, and I don't know, when you are located near the villages, there is lots of light coming up from them. And you need to keep in mind that this is just what you have to work with. And you need to adjust because most of the lights in Norway are pretty warm, like they have warm temperature. So when you, for example, adjust your temperature in the camera or white balance, they have, yeah, white balance it's called, but when you adjust your white balance, keep in mind that the area where the lights like man-made lights are located, there will be lots of warm orange tilted light. So I think this is pretty much it for the video. I hope I made it clear. If there is something I missed, please let me know in the comments. So I hope you enjoy this video. Leave it a like. I don't know how to say it in English, but just press the like button if you enjoyed it, press dislike button if you didn't enjoy it, leave the comment and subscribe. I will appreciate it, and see you soon. We'll make more videos about Lofoten and photography and Lofoten from my perspective. Thank you for watching.